In the last three northern governorship elections, where a third-party candidate received more than 15% of the vote, the APC lost the state every single time. Now, a coalition is being constructed quietly, methodically, designed to replicate that exact calculation at minimum 7 northern states simultaneously in 2027. Nobody in the mainstream is doing that math out loud. While every political conversation in Nigeria right now is focused on whether Atiku Abubakar can control the PDP machinery heading into 2027, nobody is asking who is financing the infrastructure of the Obi-Kwankwaso coordination and what those financiers expect to receive in return. But here is the question that this entire analysis is built to answer. Kwankwaso has never entered a national alliance he did not exit on his own terms. So why for the first time is he allowing Peter Obi's name to be placed above his in coalition conversations? What does Kwankwaso know about 2027 that Atiku doesn't? Hold that question. Everything that follows is the answer. Before we go further, if you're new here, this channel exists for one reason: to give Nigerians the political analysis mainstream media is too afraid or too compromised to deliver. Hit subscribe and stay with me. This gets deeper. Let's start with what actually happened and why it happened now. Atiku Abubakar's camp released a pointed public statement, not through back channels, not through a proxy interview, not through a carefully placed leak, directly with his name attached, naming the Obi-Kwankwaso axis as a destabilizing force within the opposition space. This is not routine political noise. Atiku does not spend direct public capital unless his internal polling or his intelligence network has told him something alarming. The timing matters enormously here. We are more than 1 year away from primary season. There is no imminent vote. For Atiku to come out this early, this directly, means something has moved in private that has not yet been reported in public. The surface narrative, the one being recycled across Nigerian political commentary, is that this is a PDP internal crisis, a familiar drama between factions who couldn't agree in 2023, relitigating old grievances. That framing is comfortable and wrong. The buried narrative is structural, and it is new. For the first time since 2003, the Northern Muslim vote, which has functioned as a near monolithic bloc in every serious presidential arithmetic since the return of democracy, is showing genuine fracture lines. And what is different about 2025 is that more than one political organization is now actively engineering that fracture rather than trying to repair it. The fracture is no longer accidental, it is deliberate. It is a strategy. There's a historical moment worth examining briefly because it maps almost exactly onto what is being attempted now. In 2003, Buhari's ANNP drew significant northern votes away from what was already a fragmented opposition landscape. The result was that Obasanjo won northern states he had no structural business winning, not because his support surged, but because the opposition vote was split with surgical precision. The party that believed it was fragmenting the other side ended up fragmenting its own coalition. That dynamic, vote splitting as a weapon that cuts both ways, is the template that is being studied right now in the rooms where this 2027 alliance is being assembled. Now here's the fact that reframes everything reported about Kwankwaso's relevance. In the 2023 presidential election, NNP polled 1,400,000 votes in Kano alone in one state, with zero Southern alliance, zero coordinated national campaign infrastructure, and a candidate the Southern media almost entirely ignored. That number did not come from a machine that needed Peter Obi to survive. That number came from a man who delivered in his own territory without a single external alliance. The question then is not whether Kwankwaso has a base. The question is what happens to that base when it is systematically combined with Labour Party's organizational remnants in the South-South and South-East, and what happens to the national electoral map when those two things move together.
Start with the institutions, because that is where the real leverage is buried. INEC's framework for coalition candidacies and cross-party alliance declarations remains legally contested in a way that almost no political analyst has addressed publicly. The Electoral Act creates space for pre-election memorandums of understanding and joint campaign structures, but Nigerian courts have repeatedly declined to enforce coalition agreements as binding on parties post-election. What this means in practice is that any formal Obi-Kwankwaso arrangement is structurally unenforceable the moment either party decides its interests have shifted. There is no legal mechanism that holds the alliance together. It exists only on the strength of personal trust and mutual self-interest. And that ambiguity, that legal vacuum, benefits exactly one type of political actor, the player who can afford to walk away last. Now, look at who benefits from this arrangement and who is exposed by it. The Obi camp benefits from Kwankwaso's verified northern delivery capacity, specifically Kano, and a credible second-place positioning in Katsina and Jigawa. These are not symbolic numbers. These are states where NNPP has sitting local government structures, ward coordinators, and an established voter mobilization apparatus. The Kwankwaso camp in turn benefits from the southern legitimacy and donor network that Peter Obi carries, the diaspora funding pipelines, the Lagos-based professional networks, the southeast social capital that Kwankwaso simply cannot purchase on his own. But here is where Atiku's exposure becomes concrete. Atiku does not lose in this configuration because his own PDP base collapses. His base is relatively stable. He loses because the combined Obi-Kwankwaso vote in a close three-way presidential race mathematically denies him the constitutional 25% threshold in enough states to prevent a first-round victory. Let me be precise about this because it is the engine of the entire strategy. Under Nigerian's constitution, a presidential candidate must win not just the highest number of total votes, but at least 25% of votes cast in no fewer than 2/3 of all states. That is 24 states minimum. The 25% threshold calculation, not total vote count, is the actual weapon being aimed at Atiku and at Tinubu. Understand, though, that this coalition is not primarily designed to win the presidency outright. Anyone operating with serious electoral intelligence knows that a third-party coalition does not unseat a sitting Nigerian president with full incumbency infrastructure in 2027. The actual calculation is constitutional and legal. The goal is to force the election into conditions under which the winner's first-round legitimacy can be credibly contested in court, in the National Assembly, in the court of public opinion. The 2023 tribunal experience taught opposition lawyers exactly which arguments failed, which evidence standards weren't met, and which procedural timelines were missed. Those lessons have already been incorporated into a 2027 litigation strategy. The coalition is both an electoral vehicle and a pre-positioned legal platform. Now, look at the regional dynamics because the map is shifting in ways that Abuja's political class has not fully priced in. The Northwest is Kwankwaso's operating territory. He has governed enough of it to understand its internal fault lines better than any external analyst. The Northeast is more genuinely contested. Atiku's Adamawa base is real, but geographically isolated from the high-density electoral states. The North Central is the zone that is being under-analyzed by almost everyone because it contains the highest concentration of two voter categories that rarely align: disaffected APC voters who backed Buhari twice and feel abandoned by the current administration, and Nigerians who voted for Peter Obi in 2023 not out of ethnic loyalty but out of economic exhaustion. That combination, economically motivated Obi voters plus Kwankwaso's ground-level organizational machine, is the specific configuration that changes the northern electoral map if it can be sustained. Now, track this silence. In Nigerian politics, silence is never neutral. It is always a negotiation. Governor Abba Kabir Yusuf of Kano, the man governing the state Kwankwaso built and delivered, has said almost nothing publicly about 2027 presidential alignment. He is not absent from politics, he is calculating. His silence is a price signal, not an absence of opinion. Governor Umo Eno of Akwa Ibom and several other South-South governors who publicly backed Atiku in 2023 have not committed to him for 2027. Their silence is not loyalty in a waiting room. It is the sound of men who have received new information and are determining what it is worth. and perhaps most significantly, the organized private sector in Lagos, which was visibly aligned to Tinubu's emergence and has since lived through the full economic weight of his fuel subsidy removal, his naira float, and his tax reform proposals, has gone conspicuously quiet about 2027 preferences. That silence from Lagos money is louder than anything being said in Abuja. Follow the money. The financing architecture of the 2023 Labour Party campaign left a traceable, if not fully audited, paper trail. Diaspora bundlers, tech sector networks, and a handful of Lagos-based investment groups that collectively represented the most diversified opposition funding base in Nigerian electoral history. What has changed since that election is that several of those same financial networks are now being courted simultaneously by Atiku's restructured PDP operation and by the emerging Obi-Kwankwaso coordination structure. The entity or entities that consolidate that funding don't just gain campaign resources, they gain disproportionate leverage over candidate positioning, running mate negotiations, and, critically, post-election power-sharing demands. Whoever holds the funding holds the alliance. There is one mechanism that connects Atiku's firepower, Kwankwaso's viability, and Peter Obi's strategic ceiling, and it is not ideology, not ethnicity, not even party structure. It is the governors. Specifically, which sitting governors are prepared to deploy state resources, logistics, and security cooperation for a presidential candidate who is not Tinubu, and under precisely what conditions. That governors and resources relationship is the hidden engine of this entire story, and I am going to explain exactly what it means before we are done. But here is what almost nobody has connected yet, and it changes the entire picture.
If the opposition coalition strategy succeeds even partially, if it produces a genuine competitive northern split, it will accelerate a renegotiation of the federal power architecture that is already under pressure from multiple directions. Here is the structural reality. Governors who successfully deliver their states for an opposition candidate or who deny those states to the incumbent acquire leverage over the presidency, regardless of who ultimately wins. That leverage has historically translated into specific, concrete outcomes: favorable budget line allocations, Security Council influence, quiet veto power over federal appointments in their geopolitical zones. A more fragmented 2027 electoral outcome does not weaken the governors collectively. It empowers them individually at the direct expense of centralized presidential authority. Some of those governors are not just aware of this, they are calculating it as the primary benefit of strategic ambiguity. Their value to every side is highest when they have committed to no one. For ordinary Nigerians, the consequences of this political architecture are not abstract. The uncertainty of a genuinely contested 2027 electoral cycle arriving on top of a non-resolved cost of living crisis, a volatile currency, and active security challenges in food-producing states create a specific and serious risk: investor hesitation on long-cycle infrastructure projects. Multilateral commitments, the kinds of partnerships that require domestic political stability guarantees to disburse, are already being quietly conditioned on post-2027 government certainty. Nigerians who are waiting for meaningful progress on the Ajaokuta-Abuja gas pipeline, on the Lagos-Calabar coastal road, on reconstruction in Borno, those timelines are not purely technical. They are political hostages, and right now they are sitting in a room where a political war is being fought. The security implications are direct and underreported. The Northwest and Northeast security architectures are partly sustained by informal compacts between the federal security establishment and state-level political actors. These are not written agreements, they are relationships, networks built over years between intelligence operatives, local political figures, and community structures that provide early warning and soft containment for banditry and insurgency. When the presidential alignment of a northern governor becomes genuinely uncertain, when that governor is no longer certain which presidential candidate he is backing or which candidate administration will inherit the security architecture he has helped build, those compacts fray at the edges. The intelligence sharing relationships, the community policing cooperation, the informal channels through which local leaders communicate threat information to state governments, all of these are political, not just institutional. A destabilized northern elite alignment is not only a political problem, it has a direct, measurable security externality, and nobody in the current political commentary is pricing that cost into the conversation. Now, the governors. The reason Rabiu Kwankwaso is allowing Peter Obi's name above his in coalition framing is not deference, it is not admiration, it is a precise, bounded purchase. Kwankwaso knows that the one thing his verified northern delivery capacity cannot solve is the southern legitimacy problem, not in terms of raw vote counts, but in terms of the specific governors in the South-South and Southeast who control the electoral logistics and security apparatus of their states on polling day. Peter Obi carries informal but real relational influence over precisely those governors' willingness to allow a credible, clean count in their zones. Kwankwaso is not making himself subordinate to Obi. He is purchasing southern gubernatorial cooperation through Obi's relational capital. The name ordering in the coalition is not a hierarchy of political power, it is a transaction receipt. And Atiku, who built his entire 2027 strategy on the dual assumption that he controls both the northern Muslim bloc through PDP loyalty and the southern governors through financial relationships cultivated over 2 decades, has now seen both of those assumptions challenged in the same 6-month window. Here is the data point that reframes what this coalition actually is. In every Nigerian presidential election since 1999, in which a third-party candidate exceeded 10% of the national vote, the incumbent party won. Not because the third party delivered votes to the incumbent, it did not, but because vote fragmentation in opposition-leaning states consistently produced margins too thin to satisfy the constitutional threshold requirements. The Obi-Kwankwaso alliance, if it is designed as a spoiler coalition rather than a genuine winning vehicle, may be, paradoxically, the most sophisticated mechanism yet constructed to entrench presidential incumbency in Nigeria's Fourth Republic. The question that needs to be sitting in the back of every viewer's mind is whether the architects of this alliance have fully internalized that risk, or whether they believe that 2027 is structurally different enough from every previous election to produce a different outcome.
Let me give you the strongest case against everything I have just argued, because it deserves to be taken seriously. The most coherent argument coming from the Atiku camp is this. Nigerian opposition politics has a near-perfect historical record of pre-election alliances collapsing before primary season arrives. Not weakening, collapsing. And Kwankwaso's own behavior in 2023 is the cleanest piece of evidence for this position. Despite multiple late-stage calls for opposition unity, despite direct interventions from credible political figures, Kwankwaso refused to step down. He is, by documented behavior, constitutionally incapable of sustained coalition discipline when the cost of discipline becomes personal. The argument is that Peter Obi's structural ceiling, a candidate who won 0 governorships, retains no formal party machinery below the federal level, and whose 2023 support was fueled in significant part by a first-time voter wave that has since encountered the weight of real governance disappointment, combined with Kwankwaso's documented pattern of self-interest over alliance integrity, makes this arrangement inherently self-terminating. It will consume itself before it can be deployed. This is not a strawman position. It is grounded in evidence. But the flaw in that reasoning is a specific one, and once you see it, it is difficult to unsee. The argument assumes the coalition needs to hold together until election day to achieve its strategic purpose. It does not. Even a sustained 6 to 9 month coordinated opposition presence, one that successfully establishes a threshold denial narrative in national media, that drives targeted voter registration in competitive northern states, that creates legal standing and documentary evidence for post-election litigation, achieves its core strategic objective. The Obi-Kwankwaso alliance does not need to produce a president. It needs to produce enough verified electoral disruption to make a Tinubu first-round victory legally contestable, or to deny Atiku the primary momentum he requires to consolidate as the default opposition candidate. Both of those outcomes are achievable even if the coalition fractures by mid-2026. That's a dramatically lower bar than what Atiku's team is currently preparing its defense against. And there's a misconception embedded in how most Nigerians are framing the story that needs to be corrected directly. Most of the analysis circulating treats 2027 as a two-horse race between Tinubu and Atiku, with the Obi-Kwankwaso axis as a complication at the margins. That framing is wrong in a specific and consequential way. It assumes Atiku is the default opposition candidate when no primary has been held, no delegates have been counted, and the PDP governorship structure, which is the actual source of convention delegate power, is significantly less consolidated than it was going into the 2022 primaries. Several governors who backed him then have since recalculated their own 2027 interests. The race has not started. What is happening right now is a pre-primary positioning war. And the side that controls the pre-primary narrative, that defines the terms on which the primary conversation is held, controls the conditions under which the primary itself is fought. Atiku's public statement was not a campaign launch, it was a defensive move in a war that is already underway. Now, if what I just told you surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know what you think before we get to the part that changes everything. Here are the three moves most likely to define this race before a single primary vote is cast. First, Atiku accelerates PDP governor consolidation. Expect targeted economic and political offers to PDP governors in the South-South and North-Central between now and the first quarter of 2026, designed specifically to lock in delegate commitments before any Obi-aligned faction can contest the primary rules or mobilize an alternative slate. Watch for gubernatorial statements of support in states where the sitting governor has been conspicuously ambiguous. When those statements come, they will not be voluntary expressions of enthusiasm. They will be the outcome of concluded negotiations. Second, the Obi-Kwankwaso axis will test its joint infrastructure before it announces it. If coordinated civic mobilization events, not campaign rallies but policy forums, town halls and community consultations appear in Kano and Anambra within the same 2-week window, that's the operational signal. That's the alliance stress testing its logistics. The content of those events is secondary. The coordination itself is the message. Third, a legal challenge to electoral coalition rules arrives in the Federal High Court before primary season begins. Preemptive litigation to clarify or contest INEC's authority to recognize or reject multi-party presidential platforms will be filed. This is not speculative. The groundwork is being laid. The party that files first controls the legal framing of what the alliance is, what it is permitted to do, and what standing the opposition party has to challenge it. Watch 3 specific signals over the next 90 days. Track NNPP state-level organizational appointments, specifically whether Kwankwaso is installing operatives with southern networks in positions that have no northern operational value. That personnel move is a structural tell. Track Peter Obi's travel schedule for any non-public visits to northwest or north-central states. And watch the Lagos business community. The first significant private sector endorsement of any opposition figure by a recognized Lagos financial voice is the clearest available signal that Tinubu's southern elite base is beginning to fracture, and that signal, when it appears, will move faster than any public commentary can track. Now, back to the question that opened this analysis. Why is Kwankwaso, a man who has never genuinely subordinated himself in a national alliance, allowing Peter Obi's name above his in coalition conversations? The answer is this. Kwankwaso is not entering a political marriage. He is making a specific, bounded and time-limited purchase. He is buying Obi's relational access to southern governors who control the electoral logistics and security cooperation of states that Kwankwaso cannot win on his own, but which he needs as a legitimacy platform to make his candidacy nationally credible and legally viable in a threshold denial strategy. He is deferring on the visible symbol of seniority because he intends to retain control of the operational substance. He has done this before. In Kano's internal politics, in his relationship with the PDP before he left it, in the way he structured his own party's leadership.
The man who appears to yield always retains the mechanism. What Atiku has correctly identified, and what his public statement was the first visible signal of, is that this arrangement does not merely threaten his path through the primary, it threatens the PDP's structural claim to be the institutional home of northern oppositional politics in Nigeria. If Kwankwaso can credibly organize the Northwest outside the PDP tent, the argument that the PDP is the only viable northern opposition vehicle collapses. And if that argument collapses, Atiku's entire Valley proposition to southern governors, to PDP financiers, and to the 2027 delegate calculus collapses with it. That is the existential stakes underneath what looks on the surface like a personal rivalry between three politicians. If this coalition architecture holds even partially through 2027, if it forces a genuine competitive northern split and generates the legal conditions for post-election contestation, Nigeria enters a period in which no presidential candidate can credibly claim a mandate without prolonged negotiation across judicial, legislative, and gubernatorial nodes simultaneously. That is not inherently a collapse, but it is a condition in which real governance is paralyzed while political actors settle accounts. Nigerians who lived through 2007 and through the months following the 2013 tribunal understand what it costs when those three nodes are occupied by competing factions and none of them has the strength to impose a resolution. The economic cost is measured in delayed investment, in infrastructure stalled, in security responses slowed. The institutional cost is harder to quantify and longer to repair. So let me leave you with the question that this analysis cannot answer, and that I want you to answer in the comments. Kwankwaso has the north, Obi has the narrative, Atiku has the structure. In 2027, which one of those three assets actually decides a Nigerian presidential election? If this analysis gave you clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what is really happening in Nigeria. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.